Apologize to our mother right now, or pack your trash and get out of my house." The words hung in the humid afternoon air, sharp and vicious. My older sister Fallon stood in the center of the patio, holding a crystal wine glass, looking down at me as if I were a pest that had scurried across her expensive outdoor rug. The backyard was filled with the smell of roasting meat, grilled corn, and expensive cologne, all gathered to celebrate my father Thayer retiring from his lifelong job. But the moment those words left her mouth, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the sprawling green lawn. Everyone stopped eating. Everyone stared. I looked down at my 3-year-old son Callum. He was clutching my leg, his small fingers digging fiercely into the fabric of my jeans, his little chest rising and falling too fast. He looked terrified. He did not understand the venom in his aunt's voice, but he felt the hostility radiating from the adults towering over us. Then I looked up at my mother Rowena. She was standing right next to Fallon, nodding in righteous agreement, her arms crossed tightly over her chest with a look of smug, unyielding satisfaction. She looked at me not like a daughter, but like a disappointing employee who had just been rightfully fired. Let me paint the picture for you so you understand the sheer insanity of this moment. We were standing on the stone patio of a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the upscale suburbs. Behind me, gleaming under the late afternoon sun, was a jet-black Mercedes G-Wagon. To anyone else standing in that yard with a paper plate of potato salad, it looked exactly like Fallon was the generous, wealthy homeowner putting a bitter, disrespectful guest in her rightful place. That was the narrative they had fed the entire extended family for years. The successful, brilliant older sister graciously allowing her struggling younger sibling to exist in her shadow. But they were wrong. The house was mine. The car was mine. The very ground they were standing on to humiliate me belonged to me. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink or try to frantically explain myself to the circle of aunts, uncles, and cousins who were looking at me with a mix of pity and quiet disdain. The anger that bloomed inside my chest was not a roaring, chaotic fire. It was ice. It was a cold, razor-sharp realization that my lifelong, exhausting attempt to keep the peace had only turned me into a convenient punching bag. For years, I had absorbed their subtle insults. I had looked the other way when my mother praised Fallon for simply breathing while entirely ignoring my grueling achievements. I had swallowed my pride time and time again because they were family, and family was supposed to stick together. But looking at my son's scared, trembling face, a heavy switch flipped deep inside my brain. I was done being the victim in a house I paid for. I was done funding the delusions of a mother who hated me and a sister who wanted to be me. "Fine," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, slicing through the tension like a blade. "I will go." I scooped Callum into my arms. He immediately buried his face in my neck, shaking slightly against my collarbone. I did not look back at the crowd. I did not look at my father, who was staring at his shoes, too cowardly to intervene. I walked straight through the sliding glass doors, my boots echoing loudly on the hardwood floors I had spent months choosing. I walked into the kitchen, down the hallway, and grabbed my son's overnight bag from the hall closet. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were remarkably steady. I walked out the heavy front door and pressed the button on my key fob to unlock the G-Wagon. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing us inside a quiet, leather-lined sanctuary. I strapped Callum into his car seat, my hands moving with practiced military efficiency. I kissed his forehead and whispered that everything was going to be okay. As I climbed into the driver's seat and pressed the push-to-start button, the powerful engine roared to life, shaking the chassis slightly. That was when I saw her in the rearview mirror. My mother Rowena was sprinting down the paved driveway, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She was wearing her expensive designer heels, stumbling slightly on the concrete, but desperate to reach me before I pulled away. She slammed her palm against the tinted glass of my driver's side window, her rings clicking loudly against the glass. "Leave the car," she screamed, her voice piercing through the heavy insulation of the vehicle. "Leave Fallon's car right now. You have no right to take it." She actually believed it. She truly, deeply believed that the $135,000 vehicle I was sitting in belonged to her golden child. She believed the brick-and-mortar house she had just run out of was purchased by her favorite daughter's mythical business empire. She was willing to abandon her grandson on the side of the road to protect a piece of metal she thought belonged to her precious Fallon. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb, forcing her to step back to avoid the massive tires. I watched her shrink in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of my driveway, waving her arms in fury. I watched my mother fiercely protecting my own assets for my sister. It was sickening. It was deeply, profoundly tragic. But as I merged onto the main road, heading toward a hotel downtown, a dark, dangerous smile touched the corners of my mouth. Through the rearview mirror, I watched the fragile illusion they had built their entire identities around. But they had no idea that by breakfast tomorrow, that illusion would be crushed into dust. Through my rearview mirror, I saw the end of their reign. But what led to this twisted reality where my own flesh and blood believed my sister owned my life? To understand how a mother could scream at her own daughter to abandon a car she bought with her own money, you have to understand the sick, twisted dynamics of the family I grew up in. I was what therapists call the scapegoat. Fallon was the golden child. And in our house, those roles were enforced with ruthless precision. From the day I was born, there was an invisible ledger hanging over our household, and my side was always bleeding in the red. Fallon was 3 years older, naturally outgoing, loud, and supposedly destined for incredible greatness. I was quiet, practical, and entirely invisible. The double standards were woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. If Fallon got a passing grade on a test she barely studied for, my parents took her out for an expensive steak dinner to celebrate her immense effort. If I brought home a perfect report card, my mother would barely glance at it before asking why I was not participating in more extracurricular activities to boost my college applications. The disparities only grew more toxic and overt as we got older. When I turned 18, I was sat down at the kitchen table and told I needed to figure out my own path in life because they could not afford to support me anymore. I did not complain. I took it on the chin. I worked 60-hour weeks, juggling grueling night shifts at a logistics warehouse where my boots were constantly soaked in grease, and attending early morning classes to get my degree in supply chain management. I also joined the Air National Guard to secure healthcare benefits and build a future that no one could ever take away from me. I paid for every single textbook, every cheat meal, and every gallon of gas out of my own pocket. I learned how to survive. Meanwhile, Fallon went to an expensive private university on our parents' dime. She dropped out after 2 years, claiming the academic environment was stifling her creative spirit. She decided to become a lifestyle influencer, then a life coach, then a boutique owner. When she started her boutique selling overpriced fast fashion, our parents took out a second mortgage and gave her $40,000 as a business loan. The business collapsed in 11 months. The money vanished into designer handbags, luxury vacations to Tulum, and expensive dinners she needed for her social media feed. My mother's response to the bankruptcy? She hugged Fallon and said she was simply too visionary for the current market to understand her. There is one specific memory that is permanently burned into my mind, a scar that never quite healed. It was the day I made rank in the Guard. It was a massive achievement for me, a validation of all the sweat and tears I had poured into my service. I came home in my uniform, holding my new stripes, foolishly hoping for just 1 ounce of genuine acknowledgement from the people who raised me. I left my dress jacket on the back of a dining chair to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. 10 minutes later, I walked into the laundry room and found Fallon pouring industrial bleach directly into the washing machine, with my uniform jacket spinning inside. She stood there, holding the empty bleach bottle, and claimed it was an accident. She said she thought it was a pile of dirty rags. I lost my mind. I yelled at her, tears of pure frustration streaming down my face, mourning the uniform I had earned. My mother rushed into the room, took one look at the situation, and immediately turned her blazing anger on me. "Stop screaming at your sister," she snapped, stepping between us to shield Fallon. She is under a tremendous amount of stress with her business right now. It is just a piece of clothing, Sloan. You can buy another one. Stop making everything about you and show some compassion. That was the day the final piece of my childhood innocence died. That was the day I realized I would never, ever win their love. I packed my meager belongings into trash bags and moved out a week later. Over the next decade, I built an ironclad life brick by brick. I climbed the corporate ladder in the supply chain industry, negotiating massive contracts and earning a salary my parents could not even fathom. I made smart, quiet investments. And when my grandmother passed away, she left me a small inheritance. She was the only person in the family who truly saw me, the only one who slipped me $20 bills and told me she was proud of the woman I was becoming. I used that money, combined with years of aggressive saving, to buy my home. It was not a sprawling mansion, but it was a solid, beautiful house in a great suburban neighborhood. 2 years later, after a major promotion, I bought the G-Wagon. I bought it because I loved it. I bought it because I earned every single bolt on that chassis. I never bragged about my finances to my family. I kept my head down, my bank accounts private, and my boundaries up. I thought staying quiet was the mature thing to do. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. Because when you do not tell your own story loudly, a predator will gladly write a fictional one for you. I just never expected that predator to be the sister I shared a bathroom with growing up. How did she manage to steal my reality right under my nose? The trap that ensnared my life was set 4 years ago, masked as a simple act of sibling charity. I received military orders for an 8-month overseas deployment. At the time, Fallon was conveniently between apartments. That was her polite, sanitized way of saying she had been formally evicted by her landlord for missing 3 consecutive months of rent. Despite all the bad blood, despite the bleach and the favoritism, she was still my sister. I did not want her sleeping on a friend's couch or moving back into our parents' cramped living room. I told her she could stay in my guest room while I was deployed. I asked for 0 rent. All she had to do was water the indoor plants, collect the mail, and not burn the place down. I thought I was doing a good deed. I was actually handing her the master keys to my identity. While I was thousands of miles away, working grueling 14-hour shifts on a dusty, sweltering military base, Fallon moved in. But she did not just occupy the guest room as agreed. She systematically took over the entire house. Through the sporadic internet access I had on base, I started seeing her social media posts. She was hosting lavish dinner parties for our extended relatives in my dining room. She was taking hundreds of meticulously edited photos posing in my living room, leaning casually against the expensive marble countertops I had saved up for, soaking with bath bombs in the master bathtub I chose. And slowly, deliberately, she began to spin a massive web of lies. She told our aunts, uncles, and cousins that her latest consulting business had finally taken off, and she had purchased the house in the suburbs. When the G-Wagon sat securely in the driveway, she told them it was a tax write-off for her company. She strategically blocked me from seeing certain posts on her Instagram, carefully curating a digital life of extreme luxury that belonged entirely to me. When I finally returned from deployment, exhausted to my bones and just wanting to sleep in my own bed for a week straight, I walked into a surprise welcome home party. But it was not for me. I opened my front door and found the house packed with relatives. My mother had invited the whole family over to celebrate Fallon's official 1-year anniversary of being a homeowner. I stood in the entryway, wearing my wrinkled uniform, dropping my heavy canvas duffel bag to the floor, staring at a massive glossy banner hung across my living room that read, "Congratulations, Fallon, on your beautiful home." My mother rushed up to me, pushing past my bags, tears of profound pride shining in her eyes. "Look at what your sister has accomplished," she whispered aggressively, squeezing my arm so hard it bruised. "I am so incredibly proud of her. And it is so sweet of her to let you stay here in the guest room until you get back on your feet after the military." I was paralyzed. My brain, fried from jet lag and travel, could not process the audacity of the lie. I looked at Fallon across the room. She was holding a champagne flute, wearing one of my expensive silk robes, giving me a pleading, desperate look. Later that night, When the guests finally cleared out and the house was quiet, I confronted her. I demanded she pack her bags immediately. She broke down in hysterical tears. She begged me not to say anything to the family. She said she had just wanted our mother to be proud of her for once, that the pressure of being the golden child had broken her. She claimed she was severely depressed and the lie had just slipped out during a dinner, and if I exposed her now, the humiliation would push her over the edge. She threatened to harm herself if I ruined her reputation. I should have kicked her out into the street right then. I should have printed out the deed to the house and nailed it to my mother's forehead. But I was exhausted. The deployment had drained every ounce of fight out of me. I just wanted peace and quiet. I mistakenly believed that taking the high road and avoiding family drama meant staying silent. So, I let it slide. I told Fallon she had exactly 2 weeks to find a new place and confess to our parents. But 2 weeks turned into 2 months. She kept making excuses. Then, a massive curveball hit. My father's pension hit a snag, and my parents decided they wanted to downsize immediately to save money. Without even asking me, my mother moved into the downstairs guest room, assuming Fallon, the wealthy homeowner, was graciously taking them in. Suddenly, my own mother was treating me like a pathetic charity case in my own home. I paid the mortgage, the water bill, the electricity, the property taxes, while Fallon strutted around playing the gracious, wealthy host. My mother would scold me for leaving a coffee mug in the sink, reminding me to respect my sister's property. I thought the worst thing Fallon had stolen was the credit for my financial success. I thought her vanity was her only crime. But I had no idea how deep her sickness really went. The toxic environment was bad, but the danger she was putting my son in was the true catalyst for war. The weeks leading up to my father's retirement party were utterly suffocating. The tension in the house was a physical weight pressing down on my chest every time I walked through the front door. Fallon had fully embraced her delusional role as the wealthy matriarch of a house she did not own and could never afford. She walked around in fake designer clothes she bought online, constantly ordering expensive meal deliveries on credit cards, and leaving the greasy takeout boxes on the counter for me to clean up. She would leave bright pink, passive-aggressive sticky notes on the stainless steel refrigerator. "Sloan, please remember to wipe down the stove after you cook your cheat meals. Let's keep the house looking nice." It was as if I were a teenage maid she had hired out of pity. Every time I ripped one of those notes down, my blood boiled a little hotter. But the real breaking point, the exact moment the thin ice of my patience shattered into a million pieces, happened 4 days before the retirement party. My son Callum has a mild peanut allergy. It is not instantly life-threatening, but it causes severe, painful hives, stomach cramps, and breathing difficulties if left untreated. Everyone in the house was acutely aware of this medical fact. I had a strict, non-negotiable rule. Absolutely no peanut products of any kind were allowed in the kitchen or common areas. I came home from a grueling 10-hour day at the corporate office, carrying a load of groceries, only to hear Callum crying from the living room. It was not a normal toddler tantrum cry, it was a high-pitched wail of distress. I dropped the grocery bags on the floor, hearing glass shatter, and ran to him. He was writhing on the living room rug, scratching furiously at his tiny arms and neck. Bright red, angry welts were spreading rapidly across his pale skin, his breathing slightly ragged. I dropped to my knees, panic seizing my throat. I looked up and asked my mother, who was sitting casually on the leather sofa scrolling through her phone, what the hell had happened. She rolled her eyes without even looking away from her screen. "Oh, stop overreacting, Sloan. You always make a mountain out of a molehill." Fallon bought some expensive artisan cookies from that fancy bakery downtown. She said they were organic and perfectly safe. "Callum just has a weak immune system because you don't feed him right. Fallon says you coddle the boy too much." I ran to the kitchen counter and grabbed the decorative bakery box. I flipped it over. The label clearly listed peanut oil and crushed peanuts as the second and third ingredients. My vision literally went red. The edges of the room blurred. I grabbed Callum's emergency antihistamine medication, dosed him, and held his trembling body against my chest until the itching slowly began to subside, whispering frantic apologies into his hair. When Fallon finally got home an hour later, carrying shopping bags, I confronted her in the hallway. I held the empty bakery box inches from her face and demanded to know why she brought a known allergen into the house where my son lived. She just scoffed, tossing her heavy purse onto my expensive dining table, scratching the wood. "You are being completely hysterical," she said, crossing her arms. "I paid $25 for those cookies. They're gourmet. If you cannot appreciate nice things in my house, maybe you should keep your kid locked in your room so he doesn't ruin everyone else's evening." My mother chimed in from the living room, her voice dripping with venom. "Do not speak to your sister that way, Sloane. She provides a roof over your head. She pays the bills around here. You should be down on your knees grateful she even shares her food with your son instead of attacking her like a wild animal." I stood there in the hallway, holding a box of cookies that had just physically harmed my child, listening to my own mother viciously defend the woman who bought them. The realization hit me like a runaway freight train. My silence, my desire to avoid family drama, was no longer just hurting my pride. It was actively endangering my son's health. By allowing this massive delusion to continue, I had given them the psychological power to disrespect my rules as a mother. I had given them the authority to put Callum in harm's way. I did not argue anymore. Arguing with a delusion is a waste of breath. I threw the box in the trash, took Callum upstairs to our room, and locked the heavy door. I knew right then and there that I had to end this. I knew I had to burn the false reality they were living into the absolute ground. I just needed the right moment to strike so the damage would be irreversible. The retirement party was supposed to be a quiet, celebratory affair. But Fallon and Rowena forced my hand. They thought driving me out of the backyard was a massive victory. They thought they had finally put the scapegoat in her place. They had no idea what kind of monster they had just woken up. Because when I finally looked at the paperwork, I realized the lies were just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. The hotel room was dead quiet. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the air conditioning unit and the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son sleeping soundly in the massive king-sized bed next to mine. It was well past midnight. The initial adrenaline from fleeing the retirement party had worn off, leaving behind a cold, clinical, and terrifyingly sharp focus. I sat at the small glass desk near the window overlooking the city lights, my laptop open in front of me, the screen casting a pale blue glow over my face. I wanted to make sure my assets were perfectly, legally secure before I dropped the hammer on my family. I logged into my county's property tax portal, typing my credentials with stiff fingers, to double-check the deed to my house. It was there, clean, clear, and unencumbered, sitting squarely under my name. I checked the state vehicle registration database for the G-Wagon. Also perfectly secure. Then, acting on a strange, nagging hunch I still cannot fully explain to this day, I logged into my premium credit monitoring service. I just wanted to be certain Fallon had not tried anything stupid with my identity, like opening a store credit card to buy her fake bags. The dashboard loaded slowly. When the numbers finally appeared on the screen, my stomach plummeted so hard I felt physically sick. My credit score, which had always been an immaculate, hard-earned number in the high eights, had plummeted by over 60 points. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes widening. I frantically clicked on the Recent Inquiries tab. There were 4 hard pulls on my credit in the last 30 days alone. I dug deeper into the active accounts section. My breath caught in my throat. There were 3 massive personal loans taken out in the last 60 days, totaling over $80,000. The loans were not strictly in my name. Fallon wasn't smart enough to steal my social security number, but they were registered directly to my home address, using my property as a verified residence to secure the massive lines of credit for her LLC. She had used forged utility bills, altering my name to hers on PDFs, to prove to the online lenders she owned the asset. My hands started to shake uncontrollably over the keyboard. She had not just stolen my image for Instagram likes. She was actively committing mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and financial crimes using my property as collateral. If she defaulted, which she inevitably would, creditors would come knocking on my door. But the nightmare was not over. It got much, much worse. A few years ago, my father Thayer had quietly asked me to help him set up online banking for his retirement accounts. He was terrible with technology, constantly forgetting passwords, and I had kept his login credentials safely stored in my encrypted password manager just in case he ever got locked out. Since I was already digging through the financial wreckage of my family, I decided to check his accounts just to make sure his nest egg was safe from Fallon's greedy hands. I copied the password, pasted it into the banking portal, and hit enter. The dashboard loaded. His primary savings account, the account that was supposed to hold the nest egg he had built over 40 grueling years of manual labor at the plant, was almost entirely empty. The balance read a pitiful few $100s. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Over the past 6 months, there had been a steady, systematic series of wire transfers. $10,000 here, $15,000 there. A grand total of $45,000 had been ruthlessly drained from his retirement account. I clicked on the transaction details to look at the destination of the wires. Every single transfer was routed directly to the same LLC registered under Fallon's name. She had told our parents she was an investment genius. She had told my father, who trusted her blindly, that she was moving his hard-earned money into high-yield portfolios and real estate trusts to maximize his retirement funds so he and Mom could travel. Instead, she had bled him entirely dry. She had stolen his future to fund her fake designer lifestyle, her expensive dinners, and the fragile illusion of her wealth that my mother worshipped so deeply. I covered my mouth with both hands, biting down on my knuckles to stop myself from screaming and waking Callum. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly evil and calculated, it literally took my breath away. My father, who had worked his hands to the bone his entire life, was broke. And my mother was currently sleeping comfortably in the guest room of my house, believing Fallon was a saint sent from heaven. Fallon was not just a liar. She was a financial parasite. She was burying our entire family alive in a mountain of fraud and debt. And I decided right then, staring at the glowing screen in the dark hotel room, that I was going to be the one to dig the grave she would rot in. It was nearly 2 a.m, but the time on the clock meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I picked up my cell phone, my fingers moving with cold, calculated precision, and dialed Delphine. Delphine was not just a lawyer, she was an apex predator in a tailored suit. I had retained her services a year ago for a minor, annoying corporate contract issue at my logistics firm, but I knew her true specialty was high-stakes civil litigation and asset recovery. She answered on the third ring, her voice crisp, sharp, and intensely alert despite the ungodly hour. "Tell me someone is dead," she said, her tone flat. "Not yet," I replied, standing up and staring out the hotel window at the empty, glowing streetlights below. "But I need you to legally destroy my sister. I need you to take everything." I spent the next hour pacing the length of the hotel room, speaking in a low, intense whisper so I wouldn't wake my son, walking Delphine through every single agonizing detail. I told her the entire history about the house, the G-Wagon, the fake social media posts. I told her about the $80,000 in fraudulent loans tied directly to my address and the $45,000 systematically stolen from my father's retirement account under the guise of fake investments. I forwarded her the screenshots, the downloaded property records, the forged utility bills I found in the portal, and the bank statements while we spoke. Delphine was dead silent for a long, heavy moment when I finally finished talking. The only sound on the line was the rapid, aggressive clicking of her typing on her mechanical keyboard. "Sloan," she finally said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious, low register that sent shivers down my spine. "What your sister has done crosses the line from petty family drama into federal wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and identity theft. We are not just going to serve her papers and ask nicely for an apology. We are going to drop a tactical nuke on her life." I told Delphine my exact demands. I wanted a formal eviction notice drafted immediately, giving them the bare minimum time required by state law to vacate the premises. I wanted a legally binding cease and desist order regarding any claim to my property. And I wanted a formal, terrifying demand for the immediate repayment of my father's stolen retirement funds, heavily backed by the explicit threat of forwarding the wire transfer evidence to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. "Consider it done," Delphine said, the thrill of the legal hunt evident in her voice. "I will have my best private courier serve her the documents at exactly 10 in the morning on Monday. Where will you be?" "I am not going back to that house until the trash is taken out and the locks are changed," I told her firmly. After hanging up with Delphine, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The emotional turmoil was gone, replaced by tactical execution. I opened the smart home security app on my phone. My house was equipped with a state-of-the-art, military-grade smart home system that controlled everything from the cameras to the locks and the thermostat. I had originally installed it after a minor string of burglaries in the neighborhood years ago. I went into the administrator settings and completely wiped all existing access codes. I deleted Fallon's profile. I deleted my mother's profile. I changed the master PIN for the heavy front door, the garage keypad, and the back patio gate. I remotely disabled the guest Wi-Fi network so Fallon could no longer post her fake life using my bandwidth. Then I pulled up the live, high-definition feed from the indoor security cameras. I watched the dark, silent living room of my home on my phone screen. I could see the door to the downstairs guest room where my mother was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of her perfect daughter. I knew Fallon was likely passed out in my master bed upstairs, dreaming of her fake, fraudulent empire. They thought they had won the war. They thought they had successfully chased the annoying scapegoat out of the family forever, leaving them to enjoy the spoils of my labor. They had no idea that I had just digitally locked the doors on their fake reality. The trap was meticulously set, the legal sniper was in position, and the timer was ticking down to 0. Thank you so much for watching the first half of the story. If you want to see Fallon face the ultimate karma and watch Delphine tear this family's delusions apart, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you would do if you found out your sister stole your father's retirement. The weekend spent in that hotel room felt like an eternity suspended in amber. I kept my son Callum entertained with cartoons, room service pancakes, and trips to the indoor pool. To him, this was just a fun, spontaneous vacation. He had no idea that while he splashed in the shallow end, I was sitting on a lounge chair drafting the blueprints for our family's total destruction. I did not sleep. I barely ate. My mind was running 1,000 miles a minute, anticipating every possible move Fallon might try to make. Monday morning finally arrived, bringing with it a crisp, blinding sunlight that spilled through the hotel window. I woke up at 6, showered, dressed in my sharpest navy blue suit, and ordered a pot of black coffee. I needed armor for today, and corporate attire was the best shield I owned. At exactly 10 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was a text message from Delphine. "The package has been delivered," the message read. The courier confirmed she signed for it in her pajamas. I took a slow, deep breath, sipping the scalding coffee. I could picture the scene perfectly. Fallon, likely hungover from whatever cheap wine she had been drinking to celebrate my departure, opening the heavy front door of my house to find a stern-faced courier handing her a thick manila envelope. I could imagine her ripping it open, expecting some sort of apology letter from me, only to find formal eviction notices, cease and desist orders, and a demand letter detailing federal wire fraud. It took exactly 14 minutes for the fallout to begin. My phone started buzzing violently against the desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I counted to 3, cleared my throat, and pressed answer. I did not even get the chance to say hello before Rowena's voice erupted through the speaker, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Sloan, what on earth is wrong with you?" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, laced with that familiar, dripping condescension she always used when I stepped out of line. "How dare you send a lawyer to harass your sister? Fallon is hyperventilating on the kitchen floor. You locked us out of the smart home system, the internet is down, and now you are sending fake legal threats? You're a bitter, jealous monster. After everything she has done for you, letting you live in her house. You pull a stunt like this? I listened to her rant, feeling the icy calm wash over me again. Fallon had not confessed. Even after being served with undeniable legal documents, the golden child had doubled down on her lies. She had likely told our mother that I was using my military connections to forge fake deeds and steal her property out of pure spite. "Mom," I said. My voice was low, flat, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used to negotiate hostile contracts with failing suppliers. "Stop yelling. Do not tell me to stop yelling," she shrieked back. "You are going to call this fake lawyer right now and call off this ridiculous prank, or I swear to you, Sloane, you will never see this family again." I let her finish her threat. The silence on the line stretched for a heavy 5 seconds. "Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once," I told her. The words were measured, cutting through her hysteria. "I am not playing a prank. The documents your precious daughter just received are entirely real. And if you think I am stealing her house, you're in for a very rude awakening. I want you, Dad, and Fallon to be at the law offices of Delphine and Associates in downtown at exactly 2 o'clock this afternoon." "Why would we go anywhere to humor your insane jealousy?" Rowena scoffed, though I could hear a tiny tremor of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Because," I replied coldly, "if the three of you are not sitting in that conference room at 2 o'clock sharp, my lawyer will forward the undeniable evidence of the $45,000 Fallon stole from Dad's retirement account straight to the district attorney. And instead of answering my questions, your golden child will be answering to the police for felony wire fraud." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my mother's ragged breathing on the other end of the line. The mention of my father's retirement account was the kill shot. Fallon had obviously kept that a secret from everyone. "What are you talking about?" Rowena whispered, the venom suddenly draining from her tone, replaced by genuine confusion. "What retirement money?" "Ask Fallon," I said. 2 o'clock. Do not be late. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the bed. My hands were perfectly steady. The trap was sprung. The monster was out of the cage. And there was nowhere left for them to hide. I walked over to the mirror, straightened my jacket, and prepared for war. The law offices of Delphine and Associates occupied the entire 40th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper in the financial district. The aesthetic was intentionally intimidating. Dark mahogany walls, frosted glass doors, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. I arrived at 1:30, leaving Callum with a trusted, certified nanny I had hired for the afternoon. I needed to face my family alone. Delphine met me in the lobby. She was wearing a stark white suit, looking like an angel of death holding a thick, black leather binder. She did not smile. She just gave me a curt nod and led me to the largest conference room at the end of the hall. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive oak table, and unforgiving fluorescent lighting. At exactly 5 minutes to 2, the receptionist escorted them in. My mother walked in first, her chin held high, wearing her best Sunday dress, clutching her purse like a weapon. She was trying to project dominance, but her eyes were darting nervously around the expensive room. My father Thayer followed closely behind her, looking pale and exhausted, twisting his worn-out baseball cap in his rough hands. And finally Fallon. The golden child looked entirely disheveled. Her hair was messy, her designer sunglasses were pushed up on her head, and her face was puffy from crying. But as soon as she saw me sitting at the table, she glared with a look of pure, concentrated hatred. "Take a seat," Delphine commanded, not bothering to introduce herself or offer them anything to drink. They sat opposite us. The tension in the air was so thick you could choke on it. My mother opened her mouth to speak, likely to launch into a prepared speech about my disrespect, but Delphine slammed the heavy leather binder onto the wooden table. The loud crack echoed off the glass walls, silencing Rowena instantly. "We are not here to discuss your feelings," Delphine said, her voice sharp and clinical. "We're here to discuss facts, liabilities, and the immediate surrender of my client's assets." Delphine opened the binder. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She reached in and pulled out a stack of documents, sliding the first set across the polished wood toward my mother. Exhibit A, Delphine announced. The official, notarized property deed to the residence you are currently occupying. As you can clearly read, the sole owner of the property is Sloane. It was purchased 2 years before Fallon even stepped foot inside. My mother stared at the paper. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, landing on my name printed in bold black ink. She blinked, shaking her head slightly, as if the paper was written in a foreign language. Delphine slid the next document across the table. Exhibit B. The title and registration for the black Mercedes G-Wagon. Purchased by Sloane, fully paid off, using funds traced directly to an inheritance from her grandmother. Fallon's name does not exist on any legal document associated with that vehicle. Rowena's face began to lose its color. The haughty, arrogant expression she had worn for decades was slowly crumbling, giving way to a pale, sickening realization. She turned her head slowly to look at Fallon. Fallon refused to make eye contact, staring intensely at her own fingernails, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. But Delphine was just getting started. The first 2 exhibits were just the appetizer. Exhibit C, Delphine said, her voice dropping lower, colder. This is where we cross from civil disputes into criminal territory. She slid a thick stack of papers across the table. They were printed screenshots from my credit monitoring portal, along with copies of forged utility bills. In the last 60 days, Delphine explained, looking directly at Fallon, you have used Sloane's home address and forged documents to secure over $80,000 in high-interest personal loans. You committed identity fraud and mortgage fraud to feed a lifestyle you cannot afford. If Sloane defaults on these, the bank sees her house. You essentially gambled your sister's entire livelihood so you could buy fake luxury goods. My mother gasped, dropping her purse onto the floor. $80,000? She whispered, her voice trembling. Fallon, what is she talking about? You said your business was booming. You said you bought the house. Fallon finally looked up, her eyes wild and cornered. She is lying. Fallon shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. Sloane is manipulating the records. She works in logistics, she knows hackers. She is just trying to ruin my life because she has always been jealous of me. The desperation in her voice was pathetic. It was the desperate thrashing of an animal caught in a steel trap. But Delphine did not even blink. She simply reached into the binder one last time and pulled out a single, devastating sheet of paper. It was the bank statement from my father's retirement account. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, his shoulders slumped, looking 10 years older than he had at the cookout just 2 days ago. And finally, Exhibit D, Delphine said softly. The $45,000 wired out of Thayer's retirement savings directly into an LLC owned by Fallon. The silence in the glass room became absolute. The mask had fully fallen. The golden child was exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief who had devoured her own family. My father reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the bank statement. His rough, callous fingers brushed over the numbers printed on the page. I watched the realization wash over him, a slow, agonizing tidal wave of grief. The money he had saved by working overtime, skipping vacations, and wearing holes in his boots was gone. Vanished. He looked up at Fallon. A single tear escaped his eye and rolled down his weathered cheek. You told me it was an investment, Thayer whispered, his voice cracking. You sat at the kitchen table and promised me you were putting it into a safe real estate fund. You said it would double in 5 years. You took my future, Fallon. Fallon shrunk back into her leather chair, her bravado fully evaporating. She looked like a terrified child. Then, my father did something that shocked me to my core. He turned his tear-filled eyes toward me. I am so sorry, Sloane, he wept. I frowned, confused by his apology. You did not know she was stealing from you, Dad. You are a victim here, too. No, he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I am sorry because I knew. I knew the house was yours. I knew the car was yours. I saw the mail. I saw the property tax bills with your name on them when I was taking out the trash. My mother whipped her head around to stare at her husband. You knew, she hissed, her voice venomous. You knew she was lying this whole time and you let me walk around praising her? Thayer slammed his fist on the table, shocking all of us. Yes, I knew, he roared, his voice echoing off the glass. Because whenever I tried to question Fallon, you would scream at me. You loved her fake success more than you loved the truth, Rowena. You worshipped the ground she walked on, and I was too much of a coward to deal with your anger. So I kept my mouth shut. I let you treat Sloane like dirt because it kept the peace in my own house. And this is my punishment. My cowardice cost me everything. The room fell dead silent again. My own father had chosen to watch me be humiliated daily just to avoid arguing with my narcissistic mother. The betrayal stung, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. They were all toxic. They were all complicit. My mother turned her fury back to Fallon. The golden pedestal she had placed her favorite daughter on was shattering into a million pieces. You stole from your father? Rowena screamed, standing up from her chair. You forged documents? You lied to my face every single day while I defended you? Fallon snapped. The pressure of being cornered finally broke her fragile psyche. She jumped to her feet, knocking her chair backward onto the carpet. Yes, I lied. Fallon screamed back, tears streaming down her face, her makeup running in dark streaks. I lied because it was the only way you would ever look at me like I mattered. Fallon pointed a shaking finger at our mother. You only ever loved me when I was doing better than Sloane. When my boutique failed, you looked at me like I was garbage. When Sloane got promoted, you made me feel like a failure. So I took her house. I took her car. I took the credit for her pathetic little life because it made you proud of me. You created this, Mom. You made my love conditional on being rich, so I made sure I looked rich. Rowena stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The monstrous dynamic she had fostered for decades had finally turned around and bitten her. I sat there, watching them tear each other apart. I felt no joy. I felt no vindication. I just felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. I was looking at strangers. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. The noise in the room immediately ceased as they all looked at me. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the executioner. Here is what is going to happen, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, emotional air. Fallon, you have exactly 72 hours to pack your belongings and vacate my property. If you are not gone by Thursday afternoon, I will have the police physically remove you for trespassing. I looked at my mother. Mom, you can either leave with her or you can find your own apartment. But neither of you will ever spend another night under my roof. I turned to Delphine, who was watching the scene with cold satisfaction. Delphine will be drawing up a repayment plan for the $45,000 you stole from Dad. You will sign it, Fallon. If you miss a single payment, we take the evidence of your wire fraud to the authorities, and you will go to federal prison. I picked up my purse and walked toward the glass door. I did not look back. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them trapped in the wreckage of their own making. The air in the hallway felt incredibly light. You would think that being utterly destroyed in a lawyer's office would force a person into hiding. You would think the shame of being exposed as a thief and a fraud would make Fallon pack her bags quietly and disappear into the night. But if you have ever dealt with a narcissist whose reality has been shattered, you know they do not go down without throwing a massive, destructive tantrum. I stayed in the hotel for the next 3 days, refusing to return to my house until the air was clean. I instructed Delphine to handle all communications. But on Tuesday evening, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Text messages from my aunts, my uncles, and my cousins started pouring in. They were furious. They were calling me a monster, a greedy corporate shark, and a terrible sister. I was deeply confused until one of my younger cousins sent me a screenshot of Fallon's Facebook page. Fallon had written a massive, multi-paragraph post. She was playing the ultimate victim. She claimed that her business had hit a temporary rough patch, and I had used my highly paid corporate lawyers to steal her house out from under her in a hostile takeover. She claimed I had kicked our elderly parents out onto the street out of pure spite, and that I was threatening to throw her in jail over a simple misunderstanding regarding a family loan. She had weaponized the extended family. The flying monkeys were out for blood, defending the golden child they still believed was an innocent martyr. For one brief, angry minute, I wanted to log on and scream. I wanted to type out every single horrible thing she had done. But engaging in a public screaming match was exactly what she wanted. It would drag me down into the mud with her. I sent the screenshot to Delphine with a simple message: handle it. Delphine did not argue. She did not write a long, emotional response. 5 minutes later, she used her official law firm Facebook page to post a single comment under Fallon's long, tearful status update. The comment read, "As the legal counsel for Sloan, I formally request you cease publishing defamatory statements." Attached is the public, legally verified property record proving Sloan has been the sole owner of the residence since its purchase. Also attached is the formal acknowledgement of debt you signed this afternoon, admitting to the unauthorized withdrawal of $45,000 from your father's retirement account. Further false statements will result in an immediate defamation lawsuit. Below the text, Delphine had attached the public deed and a redacted copy of the confession Fallon had signed to avoid jail time. It was a brutal, surgical strike. Delphine brought concrete, undeniable facts to an emotional knife fight. Within exactly 3 minutes, Fallon deleted the entire post. But on the internet, 3 minutes is a lifetime. The screenshots had already been taken. The group chats within the extended family went entirely silent. The angry text messages I was receiving suddenly stopped. An hour later, an aunt who had called me a monster sent a quiet, awkward message apologizing, saying she had no idea about the stolen retirement money. I deleted it without replying. The flying monkeys had scattered, terrified of the truth. Thursday afternoon finally arrived. The 72-hour deadline had expired. I drove the G-Wagon back to my neighborhood, parking half a block away. I had called the local police precinct earlier that morning and requested a civil standby, explaining that I was evicting a hostile family member who had committed fraud. 2 squad cars were parked in my driveway. I walked up to my house and stood on the lawn, watching the final act of the play. Fallon was dragging black trash bags full of her cheap, fake designer clothes out of the front door, weeping hysterically. My mother was carrying boxes, looking utterly defeated, refusing to make eye contact with the police officers standing by the door. They were loading their belongings into a beat-up rental van. There was no glamorous exit. There was no pride left. The golden child was leaving the castle she had pretended to own, escorted by the police, looking exactly like what she was, a fraud who had run out of lies. When the van finally pulled out of the driveway and the police officers gave me the all-clear, I walked through the front door of my house. It was a mess. There were scuff marks on the walls, trash left on the counters, and a lingering smell of cheap perfume. But it was quiet. It was finally truly mine. I changed the locks one last time, walked into the living room, and sat on the floor in the silence. The war was over. But the hardest part, the rebuilding of my life without the toxic weight of my family, was just beginning. 3 months passed. The transition from chaos to peace was jarring. My son Callum stopped asking why his aunt was always yelling. He stopped getting mysterious rashes because there were no more secret peanut cookies in the pantry. Our home became a sanctuary. I painted the guest room, threw out the expensive furniture Fallon had ruined, and bought a simple, comfortable couch where Callum and I would read books every evening. The legal fallout was quiet but severe. Fallon was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the bad side of town. With her credit destroyed and the massive debt hanging over her head, her influencer dreams died overnight. She had to get a job as a waitress at a diner, working grueling shifts just to meet the minimum monthly payments on the agreement Delphine had drafted. If she missed a payment, she went to jail. It was a harsh reality check for someone who thought she was born for royalty. My father moved into a small apartment as well. He got a part-time job as a hardware store greeter to try and rebuild the retirement savings he had lost. We met for coffee sometimes. He was deeply apologetic, carrying the heavy guilt of his cowardice. I forgave him, but the relationship was permanently changed. The blind respect I had for him as a child was gone, replaced by a cautious, guarded pity. And then, there was my mother. Rowena had lost her golden child. The shiny, successful daughter she had paraded around the family was exposed as a criminal. Stripped of her bragging rights, Rowena found herself isolated and lonely. So, predictably, she tried to crawl back to the scapegoat. She sent me a short text message asking if we could meet at a public park near my office. I agreed, allowing exactly 30 minutes for the interaction. I sat on a wooden bench under a large oak tree. Rowena walked up, looking significantly older than she had at the retirement party. Without Fallon's fake wealth to bask in, she just looked like a tired, bitter woman. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "Sloane," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to see Callum. I miss my grandson. And I think this whole situation has gone far enough. We are family." I looked straight ahead at the playground, watching a group of kids run around. I did not say anything, waiting for the inevitable. "If I misunderstood your financial arrangement with Fallon, I am sorry," she said, taking a deep breath. "But you have to admit, you were very secretive about your money. You never told us you bought the house. You let us believe it." I turned my head slowly and looked her dead in the eyes. I felt a cold surge of disgust. Even now, even after everything was exposed, she was still trying to protect her pride. She was still trying to shift the blame onto me. I raised my hand, cutting her off instantly. "Stop." Rowena blinked, taken aback by my sharp tone. "An apology starts with naming exactly what you did," I said, my voice hard and unforgiving. Not questioning how I heard it. Not blaming me for being secretive. "You humiliated me in front of my son. You treated me like a parasite in my own home. You blindly worshipped a thief because she fed your massive ego, and you allowed her to put Callum's health at risk." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt zero sympathy. "I am not your backup plan, Mom. I am not the daughter you get to love only when the golden one loses her shine. If you want any future relationship with my son, it requires ironclad boundaries." I laid down the law. She was never allowed to enter my home again. Any visits with Callum would be in public, fully supervised by me, and limited to 1 hour a month. She was forbidden from ever mentioning Fallon's name in front of him. She was not allowed to criticize my parenting, my job, or my life. "These are not requests," I told her, standing up from the bench. "These are the strict conditions that make a relationship safe for my child. If you violate a single one of them, you will never see us again." She looked up at me, the tears finally spilling over. She did not argue. She did not try to negotiate. She just nodded her head, a pathetic, silent agreement. I walked away from the park, feeling the heavy burden of my childhood finally lift off my shoulders. I was no longer hoping for a mother's love. I had accepted the reality of who she was, and in doing so, I had taken back all of my power. The scapegoat had outgrown the slaughterhouse. 1 year has passed since the explosive retirement party that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I am sitting on the patio of my backyard. The same patio where I was ordered to pack my bags and leave. But today, the air smells like fresh rain and blooming jasmine, not tension and roasted meat. The G-Wagon is parked securely in the driveway, freshly washed. The mortgage is paid. The house is entirely mine. I watch my son Callum running across the green grass, chasing a yellow butterfly, his laughter echoing off the wooden fences. He is bigger now, stronger, and incredibly happy. He does not remember the screaming. He does not remember the toxic environment that used to poison these walls. He only knows peace. People often ask me if I feel victorious. They think the story is about the ultimate revenge, about exposing the villain and keeping the expensive house and the luxury car. They think the climax of the story was dropping those documents on the table and watching my sister's fake empire crumble into dust. But the truth is much deeper and much more complicated than that. The house and the G-Wagon are just material possessions. They are metal, wood, and glass. They were never my actual victory. My real victory was refusing to teach my young son that keeping a toxic family together requires one person to silently absorb humiliation. My victory was breaking a generational curse. I grew up believing that my worth was defined by how much abuse I could quietly take to keep my mother happy. I believed that because I was not the golden child, I had to earn my space in the world by being invisible. But looking at Callum, I knew I could not let him grow up in the shadow of that sickness. I could not let him watch his mother be treated like a second-class citizen and think that was what love looked like. Fallon destroyed her own future. She traded a lifetime of genuine sibling support and family connection for a few years of fake Instagram photos and the hollow praise of a narcissistic mother. She is currently drowning in debt, working double shifts, and living in a reality she can no longer put a filter on. The ironic tragedy of it all is that she used the assets of the very person she despised to try and build her worth. She built a house of cards on a foundation of my hard work, and the wind eventually blew it all down. My mother is learning the hard way that an apology only becomes meaningful when changed behavior follows it. She shows up to her supervised, 1-hour visits at the park. She brings small toys for Callum. She does not cross the boundaries. The relationship is cold, distant, and purely transactional, but it is safe. I will never forgive her for the decades of emotional neglect, but I have found a way to let go of the anger so it does not consume my present. Reconciliation is a word people throw around a lot when dealing with family estrangement. They say blood is thicker than water. They say you only get one family. But I have learned that DNA is not a free pass to inflict trauma. Reconciliation does not mean returning to the dysfunctional dynamic we had before. It means creating an entirely new structure built on truth, severe accountability, and the humility to accept the consequences of your actions. The legal protections I put in place mattered. The deeds, the lawyers, the eviction notices, they kept fear from turning my life into chaos. But those documents did not repair my family. Nothing could repair a foundation that was rotten from the very beginning. The only thing I could do was bulldoze it and build my own life on solid ground. As the sun begins to set, casting a warm golden glow over the backyard, Callum runs up to me and jumps into my lap. He points at the driveway. "Mommy's house," he says proudly, his little voice filled with certainty. "Yes, baby," I smile, wrapping my arms tightly around him. "Mommy's house. But more importantly, it is our safe place." My lawyer Delphine told me recently over a brief lunch that I was far too merciful. She said I should have handed the wire fraud evidence over to the federal prosecutors and let Fallon spend 5 years in a minimum security prison to truly learn her lesson. She said allowing her to pay it back on a payment plan was a gift she did not deserve. Sometimes, when I am lying in bed at night, thinking about the sheer audacity of what she did, I wonder if Delphine was right. I wonder if by keeping her out of a jail cell, I left a tiny crack open for the toxicity to return someday. So, I turn the question over to you, the jury of the internet. Was I too soft on my sister? Should I have sent her to prison for stealing our father's retirement to fund her fake life? And do you think I am making a mistake by allowing my mother even supervised access to my son after everything she enabled? Let me know your brutal, honest thoughts down in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family and had to fight tooth and nail for your own peace, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Remember, protecting your peace is never a crime, even if it means walking away from the people who share your blood. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next story.